and hopefully we'll take some use that elsewhere. So my name is Brian Ellis. I'm with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. We do a number of things. Some of what we do is we work in emergency management planning and how to mitigate for disasters and hurricanes. We created a simulation called Project Phoenix 2.0, which is a plausible worst case category 5 scenario direct hit on the Tampa Bay area. So we find things like George's film very interesting, and I had the opportunity to connect with George, make the film available, and have this discussion today. So this has been really great for us, and thank you to the audience for tuning in, and thank you, George, for being here. I'm going to introduce George Siegal. Is that correct? Siegal?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. All right, so George is the owner of Move the World Films and directed and produced The Last House Standing and Licensed to Parent. So he is the creator of this film, and hopefully we all got to see it. George began his career in front of the camera as a weathercaster, newscaster, and sportscaster. He worked in markets from LA and San Francisco, Seattle, Detroit, and San Antonio, Texas. George and his wife and their children live in Tampa. George has been a resident in this area for 5 years now. So that's George's story. So I think we all watched the film. I watched the film, and we know what it's about. We know it's about basically what preparations and what level of preparedness are typical homes and buildings throughout our nation. What's the current status and where could they go? And so I found it informative. I want to ask you, George, what inspired you to create this particular project?
Well, when I was in the TV news business, I was a weathercaster and a reporter. I used to have to go out and cover stories of places that got wiped out by disasters. And pick the disaster, it's the same story everywhere. People just never thought it would happen to them. And I was always amazed by that, because if you live in Tornado Alley, you have to assume a tornado could happen. If you live in the woods, you have to assume there could be a fire. And certainly if you live in along the Gulf Coast, you know that there likely is going to be a hurricane at some point. So why do people live like this? And that's just human nature. And so I said, well, I want to make a film that shows how bad it is if you don't pay attention, how bad it is if you don't do things to be better prepared, and what the cost of that truly is. Because people will say, I want to save a little money by not necessarily putting it all into my house and making it safer, but it's the cost of what happens after the disaster that people can't really calculate. Losing everything that means something to you, having all your possessions destroyed, family heirlooms, being displaced from your house, having to deal with insurance companies and flood damage repair and all this stuff. I've had flooding in houses I've lived in, and it's a nightmare. And I just had like a foot of water in a basement, and the company that comes out to clean it was horrible to deal with. Then all the construction and the insurance. Imagine your whole house getting that. And I know a lot of people in Tampa have experienced that, yet it's interesting here. What I've noticed since I moved here, most of my neighbors don't have generators. Most people don't take hurricanes real seriously until right before, when they have to evacuate.
Right.
And it's truly that attitude of it can't happen to me. So I made this film to show people what happens when it happens to you and why you don't want to get like that.
Absolutely. Now, I've lived here, so I've experienced hurricanes, tropical storms, flooding to an extent. Have you yourself been through a lot more of the disasters depicted in the film, which include tornadoes, earthquakes, wildfires? I know you've lived other places, so maybe you have seen that more than myself.
Well, I've seen a tornado from a distance, but nowhere near where I was threatened from it. When I was a kid, I was in a hurricane in South Florida, but it was just kind of a blow-by hurricane, one that didn't really leave a lot of damage. But I've been in a number of earthquakes and experienced wildfires. I was in Candlestick Park for the 1989 World Series. I was sitting on the top deck of the stadium, and I thought the whole stadium was going to collapse. It was frightening. Roads I used to drive to work completely pancaked. People were killed on those roads. And the same thing when I lived in Los Angeles. Knocked out of bed one morning by an earthquake. And those to me are more frightening than hurricanes, because you get no notice. You know, with a hurricane, we see the forecasters are wrong quite often where it's going to go. It's not an exact science predicting where it's going to go, but you have an idea that it's in your area. We usually aren't surprised by a hurricane. You can get surprised by earthquakes, and you certainly can get surprised very little notice on tornadoes, wildfires. The wind shifts, and you could be in big trouble in a very short period of time. So yeah, I've experienced a lot of those, and I don't like them, but it was worth the risk of living here. I mean, this is the greatest place I've ever lived, and I wish I had gotten here sooner.
Now, can you talk about how the film was made? I'm sure probably most of us haven't made a film, or if we have, it's been small. What steps did you take? Do you just start picking up the phone one day and start making calls? What happens with something like this?
Well, I can't speak to everybody's process. For mine, I had to find something to theme it around. I knew I wanted to make this film. And then Mexico Beach and Hurricane Michael happened. And I got a hold of the owner of the house that I defined in the film as the last house standing. And so I used that as a central figure of, okay, this is the gold standard. Not everybody's going to have this, but it's certainly something to aim for. And then I started trying to reach different experts in the field that would talk to us. I was told we were lucky to get the FEMA director. That's not easy to do. Getting Sean Sullivan was a little easier, but still tough. He's a busy guy. He was great in the film. And, one by one, we started picking off people that we could get to that would talk to us. People are always suspicious of talking to filmmakers because they don't know what you're going after with your angle. That's what FEMA said. When I sat down in the FEMA director's office, Brock Long, his PR person said, "How the hell did you get in here as a filmmaker?" And I said, "Because we're not here to blast FEMA.
Right.
We made our objective very clear. We want, if our message gets out, your job is easier." And FEMA is trying to transition to that anyway, of getting people to be more proactive instead of reactive. So then they just had to have that leap of faith that we were going to be honest about it. But an entity that large, they make you sign a release with them. We make everybody sign a release. I had to sign a release with FEMA, which I would never do anywhere else, where you say they have a right to approve what you shot, because that's risky as a filmmaker. What if they had said something that I just wanted to pounce on? But I knew that wasn't our objective there. So that's one of the few times in my career I've done that, because I knew we weren't not going after anybody. We were just there to pick their brain and learn how everybody could be transitioning to being more proactive. But it's getting all those people. Henk Ovink was in the film. He's a water ambassador from the Netherlands who President Obama brought in after Hurricane Sandy. And I saw him on 60 Minutes, and it just took me over a year to get him. So, it takes time. That's why films take years to make, because especially if you're a small crew, because you can't afford to screw up. When Henk was coming here, he was part of some event. You guys were part of it over in St. Pete. And just getting him to spend 15 minutes with us was really difficult. It's like I say, it took over a year. So it's a long process, and things have to fall together just right.
Yeah, the people that were featured in the film I thought were really excellent, from the homeowners to like Henk Ovink and the FEMA director. It was very comprehensive. You brought up the actual last house standing, which is the actual title of the film, and I didn't mention it in my take of the film, but for those who don't remember in the film, that was a brand new house built just before Hurricane Michael. It was built in Mexico Beach, and it was built to a high level of standard. So when it faced, just a month after it was built, it faced a Category 5 direct hit hurricane. And in the film, you see that the dwelling had almost no impacts at all, and all the homes around it were moved, gone. So I should have mentioned that, but that was very, very compelling. It's really cool to see that and to speak with the homeowners. So that was excellent. Now in the film, something I liked a lot was, while it's old, mention of the Hammurabi Code. So I thought that was really clever, really well done. I didn't know what it was. I've heard of it, but basically it's a set of rules. But one of the rules specifically talks about, if a builder of a home creates an inferior home, and the occupant or the resident of that home is killed by the structure and they die, that builder would be sentenced to basically to death. So I found that very compelling. I know that's not the case these days, at least I don't believe so. Uh, I know it's primitive, but is there anything sort of like this out there today? Are builders of homes held to any types of legal standards or any ramifications beyond sale of the home?
Hey, we're lucky if they're still in business after they finished our home. You know, the way this turns over, and you know, when I lived in Texas, the laws were pretty much in favor of builders, and you couldn't sue them. You could only go to arbitration if you had a problem, because no jury in the world is going to side with the builder against a homeowner in most cases. Here, you know, I see stories on the news about probably the biggest problem people have is pool builders, but homes that aren't, you know, problems you have with your house that you just hope the guy's around or the gal's around to answer the phone and come out and fix what they didn't do right. I love the idea of skin in the game. I don't know that any business would do that, but I certainly think because the real estate market is so hot here in Tampa, that if you look at a house and it's a crappy house and you don't want it, there may be 10 other people that do want it. So I think people are buying things and they're rewarding work that's not great. They're rewarding the guy that built wood on the second floor instead of making block on both floors, knowing that house is going to be in trouble if a major hurricane hits. One of the things when you talk about Mexico Beach, those guys, LeBron Lackey and his cousin, or I think it was his uncle, they said, we didn't want to build to code. We wanted to build a house that would survive the hazard that could hit this area. Those are two very different things.
Right.
And what's fascinating is Mexico Beach, after getting hit by a Category 5 hurricane, only raised the wind rating for new construction from 130 miles an hour to 140 miles an hour. So if they got hit by another Category 5, they're not even rebuilding to a standard that would survive what wiped them out. That's fascinating to me.
What you said there about if you don't want to purchase a house, there's 10 other people right behind you that are going to purchase that house. I guess it's like a blessing a blessing and a curse, because we have such a demand here in the Tampa Bay area for housing that inferior housing is not really a major concern, because people just want to get the best price and get somewhere to live in the Tampa Bay area. So I would have to think that resiliency and strength of the home is a lot of times an afterthought for a lot of purchasers.
I bet it's not even a thought. I mean, here in South Tampa, where I live, there's apartment buildings down across Gandy. There's a building that's made entirely out of wood.
Right.
I don't understand that. Would you rent an apartment in a building like that? I mean, look where that is. The vulnerability of where the storm surge would be and high winds would be of a hurricane approaching from the southwest. That place is going to be obliterated. But their calculation was, well, it'll survive long enough to make it worth it. Or maybe builders think, well, we'll just come back and fix it or rebuild it. That's not Hammurabi's code, because you as the homeowner are the one that is completely screwed by that inferior construction. Now, you know, people here, you ask around, you know who the good builders are, you know who the ones are that people go, yeah, they're all right. You really have to do your homework, and you have to see how much they'll let you inside behind the walls of what they're doing and how securely they're building that house. I talked to one builder because I was looking over, I saw two houses that this builder was building across West Shore, close to the bay. And one house he had wood on the second floor, and his other house he had concrete on the second floor. And I said, "You're a custom builder. Why are you building the one with wood, knowing that it's inferior?" And he said, "That's what the homeowner wanted. That's what they engineered it for." And so, whose responsibility is it to build better houses? The gentleman we interviewed in Oklahoma said it's the home buyer's responsibility to ask for more. And that's really another point in the film, that we have to demand more, because there can be great government officials and people in charge, but they're not going to change the building code right away. The builders lobby to keep that code from getting strengthened. That's an uphill battle to just change a building code. It doesn't happen all that often. If we don't demand more, it's us, the homeowners, that are going to lose everything. You know, the builder, they're a builder. They'll just build again. But it's your house that's been wiped out. So
Right.
we have to demand more. We have to hold these people to a higher standard.
You know, I recall as a first-time home buyer 5 years ago, I purchased a home, a very modest home in St. Petersburg. One of my requirements, really one of my only requirements, was one, affordability, but two, I wanted block. And I wanted block because I wanted termites in block typically don't play nice. So that was my thought process as a 26-year-old. And I didn't really think much about hurricanes. And I think there's a lot of people that are guilty like me. And even though I've been through Irma, it's easy to forget. So I'm a part of the problem, I suppose. Now, some interesting takeaways I had from watching your film. Your film was discussing with a lifetime resident of Mexico Beach, who mentioned that when she was driving down the street, she became disoriented because there were no more landmarks, no more trees or certain landmarks. And I think here, I'm a lifetime resident of Pinellas County. There's no way I would become disoriented. I know this place like the back of my hand, but in critical thinking, if Category 5 hurricane hit here, I probably wouldn't be as knowledgeable as I think I would. So that was good to hear. That was quite a takeaway.
Oh, because it repurposes everything around you. I mean, when you look at places I've been in that have been hit by disasters, I've been to Moore, Oklahoma after in 1998, they had a major, it was like an EF5 tornado that did incredible damage there. And people didn't recognize the neighborhood anymore because you never see it that way. It's like when you move into a new neighborhood in the daytime and then you come home at night. Everything's different at night. Now imagine all the trees are gone. Houses that were structures that you're used to identifying with are no longer there. Signs, buildings. Once those things get damaged like that, it's very hard. And that woman, that the couple that made that comment were so disoriented. They were wearing dirty clothes. They were hoping just to meet with attorneys to talk about how to get back on the path to recovery. Unfortunately, in Mexico Beach, there were a lot of bad actors that came in after the storm and ripped people off. One of the guys that was showing us around is in jail, and a lot of people are suing him because he would claim their insurance, that the insurance company had to pay him to then do the repairs on their house. And so they start juggling a number of jobs and rip people off. Some of the people in our film lost $50,000 to $100,000 or more in insurance money because of these crooks. And that's just another arm of a disaster. It's okay, what happens after a disaster? Well, I bet here in Tampa and in Mexico Beach, there are great first responders, firefighters, police, people that come in and save your life and help you. But it's that wave that comes in after them, the guy that sees your roof leaking and wants to put a tarp on your house for $10,000. Or says he can help fix your problem and takes a deposit and never comes back again.
Right.
And disasters bring out the best and they bring out the worst. And there's nothing more painful to see than somebody who's been victimized by a disaster and then gets victimized by crooks after the disaster. They get hit twice.
Absolutely. Looks like we have a question here in the chat from Matthew Myers. And the question is, what are your thoughts on using the ICC, International Code Council codes, and how to get buy-in from local governments? And we got a response here from Steve Litcher, who's in emergency management. And his answer to that was South Florida, after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, had the same issues. Street signs were down, homes were gone, water towers were blown all over. So he was listening to our discussion there. But George, are you familiar with the ICC, International Code Council?
Yes, but I can't speak to the specific codes. There's probably people that are watching this or that will watch it that would be more experts on that. I know some of the people in our film are on these various codes, Fortified, probably the ICC. And if they have higher standards, you as the home builder or the person who's buying it can ask them to build anything you want if you're catching them early enough in the construction. And what Aris Papadopoulos said in our film, he lives in South Florida. He wrote the book Resilience, the Ultimate Sustainability, and it's kind of like a Bible for how we should be building things. And he says everybody in Florida should be adopting South Florida's building standards, where the wind code, I think, is 175 miles an hour. I know they do that in high rises. I have family that lives in a high rise here, and they were told their wind rating was to South Florida standards or above. But I'm not sure that's the rating for home construction here in Tampa. I would venture it's not even close. So I don't know how tough our standard is here. All I know is the eye test when I'm walking around my neighborhood or driving around, and I see so much wood on the second floor, And then I see things like the Hurricane Phoenix scenario, which talked about how many homes and businesses would be destroyed. So thus you experts telling us that all those houses would be destroyed. That means they're not built very well.
I'm seeing the same thing in Pinellas County and Hillsborough County. When I look at new apartment complexes, which are going up every day, you can see most of the structure is wood frame, with the exception sometimes of the first floor. But there's a lot of wood going on, and I don't, not disputing the strength of wood, but I just know, I believe concrete and block is much stronger. Some more thoughts I had that came out of the film. 80% of the city of Mexico Beach was destroyed in 3 hours. That's a quote from the mayor. That's if I sit down and think about that, that's really an amazing thing to think about. 3 hours, 80% of your city's gone. And granted, that's a small city, but that's quite serious. City of Mexico Beach, I believe the mayor said they have a $3.5 million annual budget
For cleanup.
for cleanup. Okay, good. I'm glad you clarified that. For cleanup. And the bill for the cleanup of the aftermath of Hurricane Michael was $50 million. I mean, talk about a deficit. I wouldn't even know how to approach a problem like that. I'm sure federal money did come in to play well after the fact. But if we're talking about a $47 million deficit, from a municipality standpoint, what do you do? That blows my mind. Do you know what the city did, or how the steps went for that process?
I'm not sure how they ended up coming up with that. We have a drone shot there where we're flying over like a landfill, not a landfill, but a dump where they were collecting all the garbage, and you could see just piles and piles scanning the whole area of trash that they were picking up. And I'm not sure where they came up with that money. I'm sure federally some money is available. A problem that a lot of people have, though, is that then they expect the government, they expect FEMA to come in and bail them out, or somebody else to come in and fix their problem. And the reality is we need to do the work on the front side to minimize the problem, because you don't know how they're going to be able to help you. And you don't know how many other disasters are going to be that area and how tapped out that resource is. And no matter what your political affiliation, I believe anytime we're in a position where we're relying on somebody else to save us, you got a problem. And that's why we so encourage doing things better on the front side. And when you have older buildings, older homes, and things that are so ripe for disaster, people really need to take a look at that. You get an inspector in, get somebody to come through, and not the guy that walks through and does your home inspection and goes, that plug's a little crooked, or that shelf is missing a bolt. Somebody that knows about wind rating, and is your roof bracketed properly to your walls, and is your front door going to blow in and your whole house collapse. I mean, there's so many different things you should know about your house to avoid that. We just have to be more proactive. The waiting for somebody else to help you was one of the biggest problems people were having in our film, and you see that after every disaster.
Right. I can tell you from Hurricane Irma's impact on Pinellas County, which our official impact was a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm. It wasn't even a Category 1. We learned that after the fact. But I recall we had trash and debris, a lot of brush, organic material here for months, maybe 6 months after, before it was all said and done. That was my recollection. I traveled to Big Pine Key 2 years after Hurricane Irma and to visit a friend, and I recall seeing a home. Well, there are lots of homes. There's lots of debris left over. So 2 years after the fact, they still hadn't cleaned up. It's a lot more difficult for them being so remote in the Keys. There was a tarp and a tent. Someone living inside of their own home, inside of the shell of their own home, which is like a block style building. They were living kind of in the carport area because their home was destroyed. If I'm not mistaken, the top floors are removed. So yeah, it's just, the residual effects are amazing. I have some comments here. Edward McCrane, in reference to my finance question, he says Bay County had to take out bank loans in the millions of dollars and wait for reimbursement. That's sort of what I thought would happen. I'm sure that was not an easy process. Tristan Morath has a question here. She says, thank you for the movie and discussion. While the story focused on a new home that was built, there is a significant amount of existing and aging infrastructure out there in coastal locations, and that's definitely true. How do you think we can make it easier and more affordable for existing homes to be retrofitted in similar ways?
Wow, it would be great if insurance companies and even the federal government offered some type of incentive for people doing that on the front side. And there may be programs available that I'm not aware of, but I don't know if that's encouraged enough. And there can be some simple fixes. In Pinellas County, there's a lot of areas that are going to flood in a hurricane. I mean, for Irma, didn't they evacuate the whole peninsula? Wasn't that whole area under a mandate?
Certainly on the coast, I believe the beach communities most
Yeah.
had an evacuation.
And so if you have an older house over there, the number one thing you want to do is make sure you have proper insurance. If you're going to own a house there, your last line of defense is having insurance. If you don't have that, you've got a real problem. And it's got to be insurance that will cover the disaster that could hit you. So for example, you could have insurance, but if you get wiped out by a flood and you don't have flood insurance, your insurance isn't any good for that. So you have to have the right kind of insurance. You have to actually read your policy. But there's simple stuff. I've done that here with my house, and I have a newer home. Is the hurricane blanket you can put on your front door where into the concrete around there, they put the screw holes, and you can put a Kevlar blanket on your front door to stop it from blowing in. You can make sure your garage door is reinforced properly, because a lot of times the garage door blowing in is a problem. What kind of vents do you have on the garage? There was a company flood vent company in our film that talked about how a lot of builders just put that net on there, that mesh netting on a garage. And what happens is debris pushes up against that, and then the water pressure builds up and your garage collapses, which can lead to the whole house going. So Flood Vent makes the company's floodproofing.com. They make a vent that when the water's going in, it opens in, and then it'll open again for the water to go back out of your garage. And it allows the water to get in and out without the debris getting blocked. You can come in and put hurricane brackets on a house. You can put closed cell foam, I think it's called, in your attic to create a tighter envelope to the house that may help minimize water damage. You can have your roof inspected. And even this, you do all these things. The reason you want insurance, a tree could still blow over and fall on your house. You can have all the best laid plans. Your neighbor's house could blow into your house. Once the disaster hits, it's bedlam and all bets are off. But there's still a lot of steps you can do that if the scenario goes right, your house will be better off. Have you updated the windows in your home?
Right.
Just a lot of different things that, if you go to our website, thelasthousestanding.org, we have a bunch of resources on there on the resource page. And people need to understand if you've tried to get flood insurance, if you're in a flood zone or not. You'll know when you get the bill. But in terms of everything else, there's a lot of little things you can do that will improve your chances.
And so what I'm taking away and what I think I know, to further answer Tristan's question about how to make it or what does it take basically to get that retrofitted house up to snuff, is I think a lot of it's going to come down to money. And how to make it more affordable, I don't know. Now, in the film, it was mentioned that Americans spend millions and billions and all kinds of money every year on home renovations. And the vast majority of those home renovations are likely to be cosmetic and more comfort, as opposed to be targeted for strength. So to your point, yeah, it's definitely going to be tough. Looks like Matthew.
Brian, it can be a real problem, and that's why when you see a fortress like the house we call the Last House Standing, some people would say to us, well, not everybody can afford that, and that's absolutely true. But when I was working in San Antonio, Texas, we used to have to go down to the south side of Texas, which is one of of San Antonio, which is one of the poorer areas of town. And a lot of people had Mercedes in their driveway. They had the DirecTV satellite on the house. And the houses were kind of in disrepair, but they had all the trimmings around them. So it's how you spend your money, if you're able to get some money, and how you value how safe you want your home to be. That's your largest investment likely that you have. For most of us, it's our biggest investment. Yet I bet more people know that their car has a 5-star crash rating than what any rating their house might have. People probably have no idea because you just think I'm in a house, I'm safe. And that's really a misguided approach to living in a house, because that's your biggest asset and it can go away in a matter of minutes. Why would you not know more about it?
That's a very good point. That's a very good way to say it. I probably know more about my vehicle, which is an older vehicle safety rating, than I do my house. I'm guilty there. Matthew mentioned, he asked a question, based on what you've seen with devastation and research. Have you known new structure or towns going in the same direction as Greensburg, Kansas? And he references their tornado in 2007. So I'm not sure what Greensburg, Kansas did, but perhaps they made a higher level of building or something like that. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with that reference?
I am not, but the one we featured in the film was Moore, Oklahoma, which is certainly going to be as good an example as anywhere, because they had 4 major EF4 or EF5 tornadoes that hit them over a 10-year period, and a bunch of other smaller ones. And after the 4th major tornado, they changed the building code. And what they did was it required certain things on the house to make it safer, and which included how they did the garage, how they did the walls, and how everything was bracketed and put together. And they said that the cost that added to what the build would be is roughly the equivalent of having granite countertops in the house. And probably one of the most disturbing lines in the film was when I asked the builder what would have happened if they hadn't made it a law. And he said most people would still choose the granite countertops.
Right.
And what they've shown with tornadoes is, okay, if you get hit directly by the tornado and it's a major EF5 tornado, you better hope you have insurance and a storm cellar, because you might not be able to do anything to save your home. But 100 yards to the right or the left, it's the place that's not in the bullseye. Those houses were getting destroyed too. They were having the roofs ripped off, the garage would collapse, the whole house would fall apart. And by changing the building code, the direct line path places might still sustain damage, but the perimeter places don't, and they survive a lot better. And that's really important to note, because the odds of one place getting struck, or when you do statistics, is pretty minimal. So you want to increase the damage that's out of the bullseye zone. Moore is just an extreme example of how, 4 times. That's just insane. And still only a small percentage of people there, I think it's 30 or 35%, have storm cellars. And when you talk about money, I asked a couple of builders and some city officials there, you could get a storm cellar for $3,000 or $4,000 and finance it like you would anything you purchase over time, yet people still don't do it. And I don't understand that one either.
Now, to think about the government side of things, municipalities, cities, counties. I believe in Malibu, in the film, 700 homes were destroyed due to a fire. 80% of Mexico Beach was destroyed due to a hurricane. For these cities and local governments, and I'm local government, and I see some others are here, I have to think about the impacts to the city revenue stream, property taxes. So each homeowner is having to pay X amount of dollars every year for the property tax, but their home's destroyed. What happens the following year? Does that homeowner, are they assessed the same as last year, or do they have a zero bill because their home is destroyed? On the receiving end of things, does the city collect, or the tax collector collect a big fat zero, times 80% of the area? So I've never really been in that situation. I'd like to know more, but those are questions I have when it comes to major devastation from events like this.
Oh, I'm sure it trickles down. You think about here when they raise our taxes every year, and you just show them a few comps, and generally the reasonable people on the board that look at that, and they'll go, yeah, you're overpaying. We'll knock you down a little bit. So if you have no house on your lot, it's certainly valued differently. Remember, if you've ever built a house, the first year you're still paying off of them not having that house there, and then it catches up to you a few years down the road. So I'm sure the governments just take a beating on that, because businesses close, people move away, everything about it. I'm sure your tax base is just gutted for a while during the rebuilding process. So the problem it goes from each individual person to probably, being a major problem for the entire community.
Some additional takeaways I had about the film: brand new roofs that were defective. So people purchasing roofs from contractors following Hurricane Michael purchase inferior brand new roofs. That to me is a horrible sin. Price gouging contractors, that goes without saying. We know that's going to follow disasters. Mexico Beach, they lost their fire department, police department. They had no grocery store, no gas station, and no bank. Could you imagine living in a community that was pretty nice and comfortable, and over the course of a few hours, your total environment has changed? Now, in the film, one of the things that I wanted to know more about was called assignment of benefit contracts, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. It appeared to be a scam, and my interpretation was contractors can make you sign away your rights to your insurance over to them to manage. And that was what I believe I got from that. Is that accurate? And can you talk a little bit more about that scam? It's not something I've ever dealt with, but I believe it could apply to anyone in this area following a disaster.
Well, when are you most likely to get scammed like that? When your roof is wide open or your house has just been destroyed and some white knight comes riding up and says, I can fix this for you, but here's what I need to do. So you're committed to working with me. You sign over your insurance, and the process of that, I believe, is legal. It's a way that he guarantees he's going to get paid. That's a horrible thing for a homeowner to do. I believe you give them a deposit if they're going to start the work, or if you want to get in the queue, maybe it's a small deposit. But if you're assigning over your entire benefits to them, your entire claim, that means the insurance company's paying them. They'll fix the work, do the work. And that's a huge leap of faith. I would never do that. But why do people do it? Because you're desperate. You're shell shocked that your house has just been wiped out really badly, and you want to get in. Everybody else is going to try to get this guy. It's the same thing about buying crappy houses here in Tampa. You buy them because if you don't, someone else will. And it's kind of the same thing with that. Well, one of the guys, like I said, that was showing us around, I understood from police officials that the guy was arrested for running some kind of scheme on all these homeowners. Now, we didn't talk about that in the film because I didn't really want that to be, that's a whole film in itself, is victims after being victimized. Our goal is to hope you never get to that position, or you try to minimize what happens so that doesn't happen to you. But God forbid, if we ever have a storm here, you've got to know who's helping you, and you've got to know, whose heart is in the right place and who's there to make a fast buck. And there's a lot of, people try to scam me every day with phone calls. I get a call from a USAA insurance telling me I have credit card fraud, and they start naming amounts that they say people are charging on your card. And I could see how somebody who is really busy might panic and fall into that scam. I just mess with those guys and try to tie them up for a long period of time on the phone to make their day as miserable as they're trying to make mine. But there's always people. There's Apple. Your Apple account has been hacked. Your Facebook account has been hacked. And these are in times of where nothing's really going on. Now imagine all hell's breaking loose. We've just been hit by a major hurricane, and all the people that are going to come out to try to take advantage of you. It's pretty scary.
That's interesting. Now, and hate to get off topic, the extended car warranty is expired. My vehicle is 20 years old. I'm very, very certain I don't qualify. Now, I have I believe a question from Joe Bories, who works for Pinellas County. I think he has a question. And if that's the case, Joe, please ask. Thank you very much.
First off, great film. Enjoyed it. Deployed to Mexico Beach, so saw the devastation firsthand, and that house, and was fascinated by that. We're actually looking at when developers come in and ask for an increase in density intensity, there's a statute that says that there must be shelter mitigation and transportation mitigation available to us. So we've been looking at our regulations, and after watching the film, I got some ideas for further balancing criteria that they could use to not have to pay the fee. But, I think you touched on it a little bit in the film. One is, you're right, the assignment of benefits is a horrible thing. And I know I've been in presentations with Brian and things like that, and we try to dissuade our citizens our citizens and residents not to use that method at all. And then the other thing, and you touched on it briefly, was the loss of use. You were talking about being underinsured, for what your expectations is for recovery. Do you want to be made whole, or are you willing to put in your own cash and come back whole, or do you want to, build back stronger as well too? But that loss of use, we saw that with Tropical Storm Eta here. We had so many homes, floods and things like that. The people needed to get out of their homes to have the electrical repaired, things like that. Now they're paying a mortgage, and now they're paying a rent as well too, while they wait in the availability of contractors, and now because of COVID and materials made for an extended time and an additional cost. So that's something that we talk about here greatly in our presentations for those two things. Don't sign away your rights, and be involved in your permitting process, and make sure you're properly insured for what your expectations are.
What they saw in Malibu, Joe, which you might find interesting, is people couldn't rebuild their house differently than what was there without getting a whole new permitting process. So your house is destroyed and you want to rebuild it. If you didn't follow the exact same blueprint, you had to go through the whole process of applying again. And over the years, things like the amount of the height you could build things. So people had a great view, but then they've changed the code so you couldn't build that way. And people just don't pay attention to that stuff, how their house ages over the years. People had old cars that they said, it's not working, it's just sitting in the garage, and they took the insurance off, and then the car was melted down and destroyed in the fire. At the end of a year, you may look back and go, we didn't have any hurricanes this year, I don't really need to get flood insurance next year. That's the wrong mental approach to having insurance. You don't do that with your car insurance. You certainly wouldn't do that with your health insurance if you were smart. You have to look at it as just an expense. It's part of doing business, and disaster can happen anytime. So if I have a good year this year, just breathe a sigh of relief, say thank you, enjoy the cooler weather if we get it, and then have that insurance again next year, because it could happen next year.
Right. Well, and then understanding the difference between homeowners insurance for wind and flood insurance, right? Well, I won't flood. Will you really never flood? Everybody in Pinellas is in a watershed. The chances of you flooding is possible. So explaining that as well too. The thing that I was wondering about, or how you felt about, was, certainly asking for stronger building regulations for new homes and things like that. Like you said, it could be the difference between marble countertops or not. But what about retrofitting existing homes? Because that's I think you did a great job on that, that some of these homes are legacy homes. I like the way you put that, these were passed down, and wow, they're excited to have it, to carry that on. But again, it's an older home and not to code to today's code, and not to build to withstand probably any of the today's standards. So how do we, where does society come in and use taxpayer dollars to help those folks, and then equity amongst that as well too? Because certainly in our South St. Pete compared to North Pinellas, there's different economic value, affordability there with the folks that can help themselves and those that can't help themselves.
I think a lot of that's educating people to understand that this is something they really need to think about. And as I said a little while ago, maybe offer incentives for getting these things fixed up and going in and maybe retrofitting your house, or making it safer, because we do talk about that in the film, that there are things you can do that might save your particular house. And it starts with getting an inspection and having somebody that comes in who's looking for those kind of things, that can tell you. We saw even on the house in Mexico Beach, it had one or two little vulnerabilities that got exposed by the hurricane. He showed us, LeBron showed us on his roof where they had a plug in the ceiling of the top floor that I think you could plug a fan in or something out there. And the wind found that and ripped off a piece of the ceiling in that one little spot above his house. And then on the sides where other houses blew by and damaged the side of his house a little bit. So you really need an inspection. And because there are so many older homes, I think some people are just saying, well, it is an older home, and if it happens, it happens. Our time is up and we had a good run. Then some builder's just going to swoop it up and put a brand new house on there, because you're not going to be able to afford to rebuild it. If you're in a $200,000 house that they're now building $1.5 million houses there, it can be a big deal. So I would go through and find, what are my vulnerabilities and what can I do to fix them? And even if you're struggling financially, it would be great if there were banks that would give incentives or low interest loans to encourage that. And that's what the people in charge need to advocate for us and say, this would be a great program. Let's have it. When is hurricane awareness here in Tampa? It was in May. A little late to fix things then. I think that there needs to be a winter campaign about let's fix up our houses now when it's nice and cooler. It's cooler outside. Let's encourage people doing these things and offer them incentives for it. I think that's a great idea.
We have a question comment from Ed McCrane, and thank you all for your questions. Assignment of benefits. Have you heard the term assignment of benefit? Do you know how it impacts you? And AOB is an agreement that once signed transfers the insurance claims rights or benefits of your insurance policy to a third party. And AOB gives a third party authority to file a claim, makes repair decisions, and collects insurance payments without involvement. So I think that that covers my inquiry about assignment of benefits. So
yeah, and why would anybody do that? You do it because you're desperate and you want that person to fix your house. I can't think of any other reason you would do that. You wouldn't do that in a doctor's office. You wouldn't do that at a car dealership. You would be looking out for yourself. Now you're handing it over to some stranger who's driving through in a pickup truck after the storm and says he's going to be your hero. Chances are he's not.
That's quite terrifying. A good way to put it. Now, in the film, you discuss Project Phoenix, the Project Phoenix simulation project, which is something that we created, which was great. Thank you for including it. And in the newest rendition of Project Phoenix 2.0, we actually simulate Tampa General Hospital, which is located on Davis Island. And it's well known that if they have a worst case scenario, their storm surge in that vicinity, right in that area, is something like 30 or 35 feet of storm surge. We actually simulate what that kind of looks like, because it's easy to say it, but we try to let people see the potential there. When it comes to recovery can be slow. Well, recovery is slow, and the relief funds from higher up certainly slows the process. Now, flood insurance, you talked about that. I think flood insurance is probably very misunderstood. Like you said, if you have flooding in your home or structure, that won't necessarily be covered by your standard home insurance policy. That's going to be a separate animal, which is flood insurance, which you may or not have, and you may not be required to have it based on where your home is and whether or not you have a mortgage on your home. Do you have any takeaways or key points to talk about flood insurance?
Yeah, first of all, you should make sure you have it because that's your last line of defense. And when I lived in Michigan, I lived in Detroit for 3 years. And when the lakes would flood and the rivers would flood every year, a lot of people that didn't have flood insurance would set their house on fire because they had fire insurance, but they didn't have flood insurance. And they investigate. Insurance companies, there's a reason they have all this money. They're not stupid, and they don't just pay it out. You know, I tell people, insurance companies are like, when you go to Las Vegas, you can buy chips anywhere, but there's only a few places you can cash them in. And that's how I view insurance. They don't just come out and hand you money. You need to make it easy for them. You need to have everything documented and prove what you actually had. And even then, if your house is paid off, we saw this in Malibu. The mayor of Malibu went in to file his claim for his insurance. I think he had a $2 million house, but he had it paid off. And the insurance company said, no, we're not paying it. Take us to court. And so he got a court date 2 years down the road. Now he'll go in there in 2 years and they'll pay it because they have to pay it. They're being scumbags about it. And because they don't have to fight Bank of America or Wells Fargo or somebody that's as heavyweight as they are, they're messing with you. There's an attorney here in Tampa that I was on his podcast, and he told me there's a certain percentage of claims that a lot of these insurance companies just reject the first time you file them, because they know statistically that a certain percentage of people won't refile. So they save millions of dollars by just rejecting your claim and making you have to file again. So it's not always a slam dunk. People think, you know, I'm telling you, you need to have insurance. That doesn't mean they're just going to pull a Brinks truck up and hand you your money right away. You need to do your part. Photograph everything in your house, have proof of everything you have, make sure you're at a good rated insurance company. Hopefully you have an agent that you can talk to that sold you the policy that actually explained it to you.
Right.
Because it's 60, 70 pages long. Who sits there and could read that stuff? But on page 57, it might say, if you get hit by a named storm, your coverage changes. So you need to know everything in your policy. But it's worth doing because it could be the difference between getting whole or not.
Now, from a consumer of insurance, not an insurance expert, I am not, but just some observations I have. If I want to purchase vehicle insurance for my car, it's quite easy to do. There's lots of small name companies. There's lots of big name companies. They'll give you a quote instantly over the phone. Boom, you have a quote, and they're ready to collect payment and insure you. When you start to search for homeowner insurance in the state of Florida, I noticed that when you put in your address and you hit instant quote, the big box companies, the State Farms, Geico's, Progressives, they send you a response right away that says, we do not offer home insurance in your state. Now, that is a little alarming, but doing more research, I have found homeowners insurance, and it does exist, but it's not as intuitive as car insurance. I was doing research yesterday because of your film, frankly, about flood insurance. Who insures flood insurance in Florida? So I have sort of found that the premier insurer appears to be a company called Neptune, which I've never heard of. I'm not sure how if obtaining flood insurance is as difficult as homeowners insurance, but for someone like me, I know how to go about car insurance all day long, but these other insurances I certainly put on the back burner. I'm just a regular resident of the county, and I could be better informed. So that's a takeaway here. And maybe I'm the only one that is this way. There is a rule by FEMA, and I'm not sure, but I believe it's called the 50-50 rule. Are you familiar with where I'm going with that, George? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of it, yeah.
+1 rule.
Perfect. Yes. So my takeaway is that if you have a home that's insured and it is destroyed, I don't even know if it has to be insured, but if it receives destruction due to a disaster and the cost to rebuild the home is greater than, perhaps Joe, could you give that?
+1. So 51% damages is one way to look at it, that it has to be rebuilt to today's standards.
Right. So if it exceeds
In the special flood hazard area.
Okay, in the special flood hazard area. So if it receives such a level of damage, you are no longer allowed to repair your home. If it goes beyond that standard, you're required to rebuild it. Is that accurate, Joe?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. So that's something that I have not dealt with, something I would never think about unless I'm in that situation. George, have you in your research, in your film, did you come across any rules like that? Do you have any take on that?
Well, what everybody should do, I mean, the thing we learned is, first of all, if you're not in an area that's rated as a flood area, flood insurance is very inexpensive. And the price goes up dramatically when the risk goes up. So if you live in South Tampa or you live in Pinellas County, chances are you're in one of the top flood rated areas. And so flood insurance, if your house isn't built to the most recent code, is going to cost you a lot more money. So I think where I live, it's 10 feet now. So if your house is at sea level, it's going to cost you a lot more to get a policy from those guys. And sometimes it's not affordable. There's a FEMA map through our website. If you go to the lasthousestanding.org at FEMA.gov, and it tells you the rating in your area and the flood risk in your area. In terms of insurance, I think a lot of that is backed by the government. Joe, you probably know more about that than me, but the important thing is, if you don't have flood insurance, that's probably our biggest risk here. Your house is either going to blow down or it's going to flood. I mean, storm surge is a huge thing we have to deal with. So I think that's a must have, and you have to have factored that in when you bought the house. I mean, you couldn't get a mortgage if you didn't have it, unless you're a cash buyer, but that would be really risky. So you need to do your due diligence, but make sure you have that. Brock Long said in our film, the former FEMA director, if it rains where you live, your house can flood. And that most people don't even think that. You know, Hurricane Harvey in Houston, A lot of the people that were completely obliterated by that could have bought flood insurance for $300 or $400 a year because they were not in a flood area. But there's a lot of flood areas around here. I know that if you go over to the east side of South Tampa, it's not in the flood zone. So you really have to know your street and what the designation is for your area.
And those flood zones are determined by FEMA exclusively. Is that accurate? The maps that
Joe would probably know that better than me. I think the
Yeah,
government
FEMA
does.
determines the National Flood Insurance Program and those flood areas, which we just went through a reevaluation here in Pinellas County and changed some heights, the higher down south and lower up north, which was crazy. So it changed the base flood elevation, some of the things that we require. So yes, and you're right. We actually have some storm surge vulnerable zones that are not in a flood zone. So those folks could be caught unaware greatly. And we try to educate folks on that. Just because you're not in a flood zone doesn't mean your home can't flood. And then, yes, we letting Ed know, we increased our rating to a 3. So our citizens actually get a 35% discount now in their National Flood Insurance Program. So we're kind of proud of that. They'll be coming out in a board meeting soon. So that's part of the CRS community rating system. So we were able to do some policy changes and things like that to get a bigger discount. But you're right. That's what I was saying earlier about insurance. You know, you got the wind insurance and then you really need that flood insurance. And you're right. If you're not in a flood zone, it is much cheaper to have it, but it gives you that peace of mind should you get a Harvey or Florence or something like that. I mean, the wildest one is Dorian. It came to a standstill and then went north. You know, that was just crazy. And if that's what we can expect with future storms, you know, you got to be prepared for flooding everywhere.
Well, we've gotten a taste of that the last couple of years. You know, when you look at the path of what was Theta or whatever it was last year, late in hurricane season, that was the perfect storm path to destroy this area if it had been a stronger storm.
Yes.
I mean, you hear the weather guys say if it's coming in from the southwest, it's going to push all that water in here and we're in big trouble.
And it did. Over 1,000 homes had flooding, you know, and your story touched on it greatly, you know, just a few inches of water in there. And that gentleman who talked about the cost, even that is thousands of dollars of damage to the drywall. And then if you go up above the outlets, now you're talking tens of thousands to replace the electrical and stuff. So yeah, flooding is terrible, insidious damage, right?
Yep, it absorbs up into the walls, and the dirt and the mold and what's left behind. And we used a company when our house flooded in Detroit, the basement, and they take your stuff and they act like they're going to clean it up and they bring it back as dirty as when they took it away. Mm-hmm. And those are the toys your kids play with. They were tapes from when I was in my early years of broadcasting that were completely destroyed. Because if you think about it, in a place, we don't have basements here primarily, but that's where we stored everything. That's insane. So here, if you have wood on your second floor, you're probably crazy if you're storing stuff in the attic because it's going to blow away.
So I'm going to jump over the comment here. And for those who are watching or those who will be watching in the future, Joe mentioned that Pinellas County has achieved a CRS rating of 3. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a scale of 1 to 10. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, but it's a 1 to 10 scale. The best score for CRS, which is the community rating system, how strong your community is for disasters, is a 1. So if you have a 1, you are in excellent shape and your residents will receive a greater discount. And if you're on the other side of that, you're a very ill-prepared community. So I see Ed McCrane commented about if a basic rule, if the cost of improvements or the cost of repair, the damage exceeds 50% of the market value of the building. Market value, thank you for putting that there. It must be brought to the current floodplain management standards. It is also the one time your regulatory program can reduce flood damage to existing buildings. So thank you for putting that in. And that's in reference to the 50-50 rule. Matthew Myers comments, the National Flood Insurance Program also depends on the CRS rating. So thank you. Firm maps were redone all over, yes. Yes, so I know recently the flood insurance maps by FEMA were redone in quite a few places. I believe Pinellas County was about 2 years ago. So they've been updated to reflect more accurate flood proneness, I suppose. Now, in your film, you talk about, well, not you, but your film talks about Tampa is surrounded by our old homes surrounded by new homes. That I liked because that is quite true. The Tampa Bay area is a bunch of older homes with new pockets of new homes everywhere. So you have different standards and different spectrums, sometimes on the same street. I don't know if the rest of the country is that way, but we certainly are. So that to me is quite interesting. Now, my house was built in St. Petersburg in the 1950s. Do we know in the 1950s or 60s or older times what standards were used back then, or what was the rule of thumb? Where were we at then, and where are we now?
Well, you've probably seen a significant change. I mean, you see that here where you walk down the street in South Tampa and there's houses that are probably at sea level or 1 foot elevation or 2 feet elevation. And then as soon as they level that house to put up a brand new house, they're building it 10, 11 feet up in the air. That's true in a lot of places. And all those other factors of new construction and how that could change how the water goes could affect flooding in your area, and the problems that you have. That rainstorm we had last week or 2 weeks ago, there were streets that were underwater. I was driving down South Manhattan and my car was in a foot of water easily. And it was like a 3-inch rainstorm. Imagine if we had a 10 or 12 inch or 20-inch rainstorm event here. I would say a lot of the older homes are in big trouble. And that's what's talked about in the Hurricane Phoenix scenario, because there are so many older homes. And that's getting back to the importance of knowing what your risk is and what your risk tolerance is, and making sure you have protection for that, and maybe getting some repairs done on your house.
Now, jumping over to fires, your film depicted a lot of the wildfire issues that Florida doesn't quite see as much, although we do have wildfires and we have plans to mitigate for, so it's relevant. But in your film, focusing in the California area, some things that I found compelling were, how do we mitigate for fires? It doesn't seem, initially when I watched the film, didn't seem like there was a lot that could be done. If a massive fire is coming your direction to your home, what can you do? My answer would be nothing. But when I watched your film, I learned that's not always true. Malibu lost 700 homes in 2018, I believe it was 2018, due to their fire. There was a gentleman, well, there was a question asked, and a 90-year-old was interviewed about his loss and the loss of his home. How do you start over when you're 90 years old? Wow, I didn't think about that. That would be devastating. You know, it would be awful. A house can be consumed within 10 minutes in a wildfire or a fire in general. 10 minutes is no time at all. There was a house that had 4 fireproof safes that were destroyed. But interestingly enough, the pizza oven, which appeared to be a stone pizza oven, survived. And the woman mentioned that she wishes she would have used that instead of the fireproof safe. So it can be devastating. I found your film interesting because when it talked about some of the efforts that can be used to mitigate for fire, there was something I've never heard of, a pump that creates a high humidity environment. Can you elaborate on that? I know it probably doesn't apply to too many of our area homes, but can you just talk about that? I found that very interesting.
Well, when is our fire season here? It's usually during the winter, like it's late winter when the humidity is at its lowest because there's less moisture in the air. So what they would do at this ranch in Malibu is they pump moisture into the air to raise the humidity level, which lowers the fire danger. You know, we always see those notices come out when we get that, a northeast wind, and it's a dry, because it's so humid here most of the time. But when things dry out, things burn a lot quicker. So their strategy was to pump as much moisture into the air as possible and raise the relative humidity of the area, and that would then make it tougher for things to burn. But there's a lot of things, from a defensible space around your house. You know, we love palm trees. I love palm trees. Those are like Roman candles in a fire. And houses in Malibu were destroyed when palm trees caught on fire and then bounced to the houses in the area. So it's knowing how to protect the area around your house, whether the soffits have openings where embers can get in. There's a lot of little things. You can get fireproof paint. You can get this foam to spray on your house that will slow down the amount of time it might burn and protects houses from burning down. You know, although that's not our biggest problem here, if your neighbor's house catches on fire, you have to worry about yours. With all the power lines we have in backyards, with trees catching on fire, we had that earlier this year. where a palm tree, the power line behind us was in a palm tree, and the tree caught on fire during one of our storms. Now, it took the power company 2 weeks to get out here. I called it in as an emergency. 2 weeks later, they roll in and they go, "Wow, you're lucky your house didn't burn down."
Wow.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the $400 worth of fire repellent gel can be applied to a home. Just as an example, I found that interesting too. It's good to know there's options on the table. I mean, I don't know if a Tampa homeowner is going to purchase that gel for here. It doesn't make as much sense, but with those looming disasters, oh my goodness, it's good to know that that is an option, that you can just spray your home with a gel, and I believe it lasts a couple days, which that's pretty good peace of mind if you're in that situation and it's imminent. Now,
Yeah, but
Matt,
how can you apply that here, Brian? What you would say is you can certainly clear the area around your house so there aren't things right on top of your house that make it more of a fire risk. There are things you could do here. A lot of the houses though that are stucco, you're not going to necessarily spray that gel on, but that's why each area of the country seems to be ripe with its own disasters. So you really have to know the hazards of where you are. With fire, they had a lot of incompetence that happened that led to a lot of their damage, because the firefighters from Malibu that knew the area and knew how to get around the streets and how the winds work there, they were all in the valley fighting that fire. So the firefighters that came to the community were from areas that they had no knowledge of Malibu. So they had people saying, "Got to let that house go. Don't fight this one. Don't fight that one." Imagine if you're the homeowner with your house that you've had in your family for years, and the firefighters are just saying they're told they can't even try to put the fire out. And that, to me, the reason we told that story is it's the frustration of when the disaster hits, it's now no longer in your control. You're relying on somebody that's going to help you and help save you. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, which I was hoping would wake people up to say, I don't ever want to get in that position.
absolutely. Matthew Myers comments in the chat. I grew up in a 1940s home after Andrew. I assume he means Hurricane Andrew. Changed a lot of how wind codes for Florida. Changed the wind codes, which I think we're certainly aware of. It did not change them from flooding, unfortunately. So it seems like he's referencing Hurricane Andrew and the changes to the wind code, but perhaps the flood code wasn't updated. I think that might be the point to that comment. Are there flood codes as well as wind codes to your knowledge? Is that a separate thing that builders?
Yeah, well, it's all part of that flood map that shows how you have to build your house according to what the risks are. So as I was saying, here in South Tampa, houses have to be, if you're building new construction, if people want to get a permit, I think you have to go 10 feet up. I'm not sure what it is in Pinellas County. So there are codes for that. In Mexico Beach, I know they raised it slightly, but they didn't raise it to the storm surge level of Hurricane Michael, which I think was 15 or 20 feet. And if you think about it, and you guys could probably speak to this better, Joe, you probably could, you can't make the code so high that nobody can build. So you wouldn't say to Tampa, "Oh, you get 30 feet of water downtown, so we're going to make it a 30-foot flood level." So there's always going to be some risk involved between what could actually happen and what you prepare for. But there is a minimum standard. The problem, and I don't know if builders lobby on flood as much as they do on construction, but there's an entire building lobby that spends millions and millions of dollars a year to not have building codes made stronger. I don't know if they do that for flood.
The base flood elevation depends on which zone you're in, and like I said, they just redid our firm maps, and it lowered in some places and went higher in other places. And then some cities require additional freeboard, so another foot or 2 foot there. But then when you look at compare that a real flooding event, base floor elevation compared to what the storm surge could be there, it could be just 2 foot more if you went a little higher, that you could be out of the storm surge zone vulnerability area as well too. So then we've done some vulnerability analysis for sea level rise and things like that. So looking at that, built to today's standards, you might not be building so your life residence, about 50 years, you're looking at that at the end of its life, it'll be too low based on, the current conditions that could be in 50 years from now. So Yeah, there's a lot around that right now about what to do with homes, especially along the Barrier Islands. How high is so even if you build up on the Barrier Islands, you might need to have a boat to get out there to actually get to your place because the roads are flooded, right? A lot of communities are dealing with that, and we're seeing that. I've heard the term for the first time here in Pinellas of king tides, right? We've never had that over here, but we're seeing a few spots that super high tide, it's coming in, it comes in through the tubes, the stormwater tubes, because everything drains to the bay. And yeah, things are changing for sure.
What was Sean's line in the film about living in paradise comes with a price?
It
The
does.
cost of.
And then, something else I think was poignant too was that gentleman, the last house standing, the professor said, he didn't just build up, he built the right frame underneath that. So yeah, you can build up 6 or 7 pilings, 10 feet deep. He went 28 feet deep. And I want to say he had 20 or so pilings in there as well too. That was what really was the difference too, because the velocity and the strength of that storm surge that rolled in through Mexico Beach, as president, there was a house that got moved all the way from its foundation out into the mangroves. It stayed, that's the power of that water, and his house withstood that. So it isn't just elevating, but are you elevating strong enough? And that's one of the things we talked about earlier this morning. We want to put down there. We're going to put, you can elevate for a Cat 5 storm surge or 4, but you got to elevate and be as strong for that type of water that you're going to encounter if you're going to elevate that high. Because it doesn't make sense to put, just 4 pilings and then you get blown off. But you were higher than the water, but you weren't strong enough than the water.
Yeah, I mean, that's a commitment, and of course he's not going to tell us exactly what that cost. I imagine it's not affordable for most people to do that.
Yeah, I thought he was coy about that.
Yeah.
Just about to say, and then he didn't.
Well, my flaw as a filmmaker is I respect people's answers. It's like, I'm not going to change what you say, and I'm not going to try to pull something out of you that you don't want to talk about. I just don't like to work that way. So we don't know what his house costs. I do know most people would probably not be able to afford going to the lengths that he did. Then maybe you don't need to live in that spot. There's some countries in the world where the government actually won't let you live in dangerous places because they're the ones that have to come in and fix it up and bail people out. And so, we have a lot of freedoms in this country. We do what we want. We live where we want. There's a price to pay for that.
Right.
Now, George,
if Mexico Beach took the Netherlands approach, they would not be building anywhere along that coast, right? Netherlands retreated from, and they said the natural environment is our natural protection from the storm surges that they saw at the different weather events that they have. So if that same philosophy here in America, there in Mexico Beach, people would not be happy. They wouldn't even be able to build out there.
Yep.
A barrier island is supposed to be a barrier island to the mainland, right?
But it's not. That's where there's a lot of nice homes.
That's where you want to live.
Yeah.
Now, George, in your film, one of the mitigation techniques for home construction is vented homes for floods. That seemed to me like a more affordable structure being built because building up high, I think, costs more money. How effective is this technique? Is it new or old? I suspect it's been around because I feel like I've seen it in some older homes on the coast. But vented homes for floods.
If you walk around, you see a lot more of them. I mean, until I put them on my house after making the film, and I now notice them that a lot of people are starting to get them. And the whole point of that is the builders will put just the screen on the opening in your garage. And the point is with that, if anybody didn't know, if the pressure builds up against your garage wall, it's going to collapse. So you'll let the water in, you're kind of conceding some of the possessions in the garage, and then you want the water to go back out when the flood level goes down. But those vents clog up with debris, leaves, garbage, whatever's flowing in the water. So this vent opens, so it's an opening into the garage, and then it opens the other way when the water is flowing back out, and it saves structures. It saves people from losing their homes, and it's an important thing to do. Why do all builders not do it? Maybe it's not required by code. I can tell you builders get down to counting nickels on jobs where they know that, well, we can save $5 here, we can save $20 there. That's why you need to ask questions as a homeowner, because the $20 they're saving could be the difference between your house surviving or not.
Absolutely. Habitat for Humanity was depicted in your film because they have adopted a higher building standard than the typical homeowner. Do you know when they adopted this policy of building homes beyond the regular standards that are required?
I don't know exactly when they started it, but they've been doing it for years. And you talk about Hammurabi's code and skin in the game. Well, what do Habitat for Humanity home builders have in common with that? They care. They are doing it for somebody. There's a pride involved in who that house is being given to. So they put more nails in. They do more bracketing of the walls to the roof. They use thicker plywood, and their houses hold up really well in disasters. So it's a totally different process that seems to be very effective, and it should show people I don't have to have $1 million home to have a safe home. I just have to have it built properly.
Now, Matthew asked the question. No, I'm sorry. Ed asked the question. Where can we watch the film? So I think he plans to watch it. And what's the answer to that? Where can Ed watch?
You go to The Last House Standing, thelasthousestanding.org, and the film is available for rent on our website for $3.99. And if you have an educational institution, you can buy a licensed copy of it where you can use it for your school or your organization to use it as a training tool. So you can also purchase it. And if you say, George, I don't want to spend $3.99 on your film, I'd rather sit through some commercials, you can get it for free on Tubi. That's Tubi. It's a movie channel. We're on there. It did air on PBS here, so it might be on WEDU's website. It might, if they save those on recordings, you might be able to watch it for free on there. But if you want to put a few bucks in the filmmaker's pocket, you could go to thelasthousestanding.org or watch it on Tubi. And if you're having an event or something that we have a form on our website, let me know. We make screenings available, and filmmakers all want to try to make a little money when they're doing a project. It's not something that anybody gets rich doing. But I also care about this. I live here. I love everything Florida, and I want to see people make smarter choices. So I really want people to see the film.
Ed has a funny comment. Government won't let you live in dangerous places. What a concept. A little bit of humor there, and I do find that funny.
A good one.
Okay, so when making this project, when making this film, what challenges did you face?
Getting people to talk to us. Because everybody's suspicious of a filmmaker. What's their angle? Are they coming in here to make us look bad? So that was one challenge. And the other is it's a very intrusive thing to go in after a disaster and talk to victims. I'm not the kind of producer director that would just stick a microphone in anybody's face. I want you to be okay with it. I want you to understand what we're doing. And if you want to talk to us, great. If you don't, I hope you're okay and everything works out. We just happen to get really good people that were very open about talking about their problems. But that's always a tough thing to do, because you're catching people at their lowest, darkest time and then saying, hey, you want to talk to us for our film? Right. And, it's tough. And some people don't. So some people were angry at us and said, go away. Why are you even here?
Absolutely.
You respect that.
Invasion of privacy, I'm sure. That's
totally.
Part of the problem. So much money is spent on renovations of homes. I mentioned that earlier. How much money is being spent making them stronger and more resilient? I suspect, and as the film depicted, probably just a fraction. Home strength displayed. So one concept mentioned in the film was displaying the strength of a home during the buying process would be a good start for homes and people to be more resilient. So being shown a beautiful home is nice, but also being shown, and I don't know if it's involuntary or not, the actual strength rating of a particular home, or the things they should also be thinking about. How strong. So having a realtor say, hey, this particular home, it's older, it's cute, but it's not built too strong. Being very forward in the buying process could potentially help some people. I don't think that is a part of the buying process as of now, but I believe the film sort of hinted at showing people up front on Zillow and things where your home potential home sort of stands. Does that sound accurate, George?
Oh yeah, and one thing that everybody can do, and it's just a matter of taking the time to do it. If you're looking at a house, walk around and talk to the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
When we were looking at houses in South Tampa, a guy happened to be walking by, and I said, hey, what do you know about this street? And he goes, I wouldn't buy that house. When it rains, water goes right up to the front door. We were out of there. Just turned
Absolutely.
around and ran. Bye-bye. And
That
it would be great if Zillow and Realtor.com and all those places rewarded houses that put the safety factors up there in the front. You know, we talk about the 5-star crash rating of the car and the airbags and all this stuff. It'd be great if that was the first thing they mentioned with houses. This house has survived flooding for 50 years. It's at a such and such elevation. It's built with block. It's things that were done in mind with grading it to keep the water away, how the hurricane brackets that were used. Those things should be rewarded and encouraged. Unfortunately, we don't do that, and there's such a demand. Look at how houses are selling for above asking price in a lot of areas. So take a house that I would argue is probably crap to begin with and put it in a hot real estate market, and now they're making even more money, passing it on to the next guy. And it's like, you know, you're tossing the grenade to the next person, and eventually it's going to explode.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's common sense, but talk to the neighbors before you purchase a home. I mean, what better information can you get about your home's integrity than that? That's something I didn't do. I should have in retrospect. I was fortunate, but that I think is a key takeaway for the average purchaser of a home or just even resident.
But you can get caught off guard with that too. It's like when you're looking, if you're looking during the day, sometimes people are working, they're not around, so you end up not doing it. When we bought our house, it was a tree-lined street that we just loved, beautiful tree-lined street. Our real estate agent didn't tell us, and the builder didn't tell us, oh, they're putting storm drains in on that street and they're cutting down all the trees. So when we came back to move in, they were all gone.
Wow.
Now, that's kind of a sob story, but the good news is they put the drains in and our street doesn't flood. So I guess if you had to choose between the two, that's a better choice. But you really have to be your own best advocate and ask a lot of questions. Be a pain in the ass. It's your investment. You know, a lot of times people want to be nice. They want the realtor to like them. They want the buyers to like them. No, you don't. You're there as a business. You want to get the best deal possible and get the safest house possible. And if it's not, don't buy it because it's going to end up being a problem.
I think that was well said. That's a good thing for people to be aware of is how you laid that out. Now, my final question here, and hopefully the audience will have some more questions. Final question is, what do you think the challenges of the next 100 years will look like? Or we could even say 50 years, but talking about the Tampa Bay area and Florida, what challenges do you expect that we're going to see, and where's the future of our homes and buildings going?
Well, hopefully it's going to be people demand more. They see the film and everybody starts putting their foot down and stops letting them get away with all the bad building that they're doing. I think it's rising water level, especially in South Florida. There's streets that are flooding there when it's not even raining. You know, it's a high tide causes flooding, so they're raising a lot of that area up. So you have to be conscious of when you're buying anything anywhere, thinking towards the future, because imagine you buy in an area where they then say, no, if you don't raise your house, you're not going to have it anymore. Or if you bought that beach house in the Keys and you can't sell it because they're projecting that area is going to be under 20 feet of water in 10 years or whatever. So you really have to know what you're doing. We romanticize about having something really cool and in such a beautiful area, and you feel like a downer if you're pointing out all the things that could go wrong or all the bad things. But it's your money. You need to do that. You know, if you have to be the gloomy Gus that says, no, honey, we can't buy this because it's going to be under 10 feet of water, you're probably making the right decision. Just go stay at a hotel near the beach. Yeah, I mean, we all have to be concerned about that. I mean, it's easy to say, I won't be around in 50 years. But if you've got kids, or if you've got grandkids, you know, I have some people say, I don't want to pay property taxes because my kids graduated from school. Well, you know, you don't want to pay for the educational portion of it. But if the schools are bad in your neighborhood, your house isn't worth as much. And you could apply that same philosophy to how safe your house is and how safe your neighborhood is and what the risks are for damage. Because eventually the market's going to slow down and maybe smarter people are going to start buying that are concerned about these issues that in a hot market, nobody's caring about. And we need to all be caring about that. You know, we need to be protective of our area and as a community, demand more. And that's a process, but it takes really caring about where you live to do that. If you don't, it's a very hard thing to do.
Well, excellent. George Siegal, thank you so much for making the film available for no cost to our audience for that week in September. Thank you for participating in this live discussion. Thank you to all of the audience for your good questions and participation. This has been a great event. This is recorded, so we'll make this available to greater future audiences. But like George said, if you want to view the film, you can do so on Tubi. You can visit lasthousestanding.com. And just thank you all for your participation.
.org, thelasthousestanding.org. If you
I
go to .com,
apologize.
you'll miss it.
I apologize. And George, do you have any parting words or messages for us today?
Yeah, no, thank you to everybody that watched. You know, it was, I hope the film resonates with people. I appreciate you guys taking the time to actually sit and watch the film. I hope you share it with other people. And, you know, we all love this area and we want it to be safe. So we have to do our part.
Fantastic. Thank you all. Thank you, George, and have a great rest of your day.
Yep. Thank you very much. Very good.